Hi, everyone. My name is Kamia, and I'm the co-director of journalism for Youth Insights.
And I'm Dennis He. I'm a policy analyst working in Environment and Climate Change Canada. Nice to be here.
All right. So, could you describe what sparked your interest to pursue a career in policy analysis for scientific work?
So it's a good question because I didn't graduate high school wanting to be a policy analyst. I sort of wanted to go into science and specifically into scientific research. What made me get interested in policy was that I did an internship with Environment Canada during my undergraduate degree, and standard lab work, doing lots of research, writing papers, data analysis, and publishing. But that sort of was the end of like where my work had like finished off, right? It's you do the research and you publish, and then maybe you give it, you go to a talk or two and present it, but you never really see what happens with your research after that. And I was interested in what happens after that. How does science turn into policy, and how does that policy impact the world? And I was more interested in the second half of that, which is why I pivoted from scientific research into the policy realm.
All right. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I feel like that's true. A lot of people don't understand that, like, there's always going to be that stop at the end of like your research or your paper, but you can also do something beyond that. So I think that's really interesting. And yeah, related to that, so what was sort of your educational pathway to becoming a policy analyst?
So it's interesting because I sort of didn't go the usual route that most policy analysts do. A lot of people do some sort of economics or science degree at the bachelor's level, and they go through some like a master's level program at the public policy school, like at Carleton or U Ottawa. I kind of didn't go that way. I sort of went into a more generalist environmental science route. So my background was I did a Bachelor of Science from Western in biochemistry and genetics. It was during that undergrad when I realized I want to do something other than research for my after I graduate, and I went into the Masters in Environment Sustainability program, which is sort of like it delves into a lot of environmental issues, all in like a 1-year professional master's program, and there was a 4-month co-op component to that. Um, I did my co-op with Environment Canada working on science communication, which seemed like a really nice bridge between the hard science that I was working on before to science policy, because it was like that little gap in the middle, like how do you communicate science to policymakers? Um, I guess I did a good enough job. People wanted me to stick around, so I stuck around. And sort of most of my policy skills haven't come from like formal academic training. They just been from working on the job, working with policy, sort of giving me stretch assignments as the need arises, and sort of learning as I go.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I think that's really good because a lot of people think that, going into sort of like a policy, like that specific field requires a lot of like academic or formal learning. But like you said, if you don't go the usual route, you sort of just learn hands-on or more practically. So yeah, I think that was really cool that, you took the untraditional pathway, but you got to the same spot doing the thing that you want to do now. And yeah, so sort of like fast forwarding to now, what would you say are some of the character traits that are required in your career?
So a lot of my work is research and analysis. So I put a lot of the soft skills I picked up in my science degree and my master's degree to work. Being able to look into sources, pull together arguments to support a thesis, really, and presenting that in a way that's digestible, actionable. So those are soft skills that I picked up that I think are really useful. And then policy analyst jobs are really about thinking on the fly, being resourceful. A lot I know a lot of people say this, but a lot of times I don't know what I'm going to be doing when I start my day. It's just very like things change on a dime. You could get requests from your minister like, oh, you need speaking points. Okay, sure. What, need them in an hour? All right, sure. Let's do what we can. So it's being resourceful. It's sort of in the back of your head, always keeping an eye on like what's going on with other teams, like what are other people working on, and being able to if you need to pull together a presentation, you can do that. If you need to like do some statistical analysis, you can do that. Like being able to pivot and having confidence in your abilities to do that. I think that resourcefulness and just honestly, having a can-do attitude helps a lot in this position because you get thrown a lot of curveballs and you just sort of have to deal with them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do look for jobs when it's like they want to know what they're doing or they want that sense of stability. But if you are in something like policy analysis, a lot of it is like problem solving, so you really don't know what you're doing. But I think that could
Mhm.
also like make it interesting.
Oh, for
But
sure.
yeah, so I think it just depends on like what you want to do and if you're okay with doing that like every single day of your life. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and to add to that, it's very dependent. At least the realm of policy I work on, it's dependent on the sort of stuff you're working on. If you're working on like a hot topic issue, like plastics or climate change or something that the government cares about as a federal priority, then yeah, you're going to get a lot of like ministerial scrutiny. You're going to get a lot of requests to, write speaking points to present at committee. And if you're on a file that's, not in the limelight as much, then you won't get as much attention, but you'll still have to be expected to, do the work in the meantime, right? So it depends on where you go. Some people like chasing the limelight. Some people like to, garden, so to speak, taking care, like manage a file and watch it grow over years and years. It depends on your preferences. It's not all like go, go, go all the time.
Mm.
There's everything in between.
All right. Yeah, so more going into more of like the career aspect, what is some advice that you would give to any high schoolers or even just college students that are hoping to pursue a career like yours?
I this is a tricky question because every time I have to sort of realize that I didn't really take the traditional path, and that sounds like a good thing, but it's also like I'm surrounded by people that did take the traditional path. They went through an undergraduate degree in like sociology or economics or some sort of science. They did like a public policy degree at um, a well-known school. So it's hard that I can't give advice that's specific to me just
Mhm.
because I feel like the things I did didn't directly lead me to the place I am. Um, it's just sort of like an odd chance that happened. I think that in terms of advice that I could give that would be applicable to anyone, including those who pursue more of a traditional path in the policy, is to get experience. I think that, writing research papers is great and everything, and being really developing those soft skills is great, but nothing really prepares you for working in like a policy shop like working in a policy shop. Like a lot of people that I work with in that have stick around in policy in a policy shop, they were there as students, as co-op students, as master's students. They have experience in multiple departments in the federal government or the provincial government. um, they have experience with non-governmental organizations. They volunteer. um, so it's really about not necessarily being good at the academic side of policy. That helps for sure, but having some experience working on files, managing risks, briefing up, preparing documents and presentations, like that's sort of like actual experience that you get from working. That's the most important thing. So I think that right after high school, it's pretty difficult to get that experience, but it's something you should definitely keep an eye on to looking forward to throughout your undergraduate and master's career if you go that route.
Yeah, I think it's really important because going out of high school, like everyone has that like academic mindset, like I need the straight A's and I need all the perfect like grades. But if you don't have practical experience, or if you don't do things hands-on, like you're not gonna be prepared. So
I guess, yeah, to add on to that, it's I don't know if I should be saying this, but I was by no means a straight A student in high school. I was like top of the bell curve, if you catch my meaning. Like it was
mhm.
very much an average student, but and that's partially because I went to a very high achieving high school. But I knew that I wasn't gonna be like the smartest person compared to like the rest of the class, but I could make up for that by getting lots of experience volunteering, picking up a summer job, reading as much as I could. Like, and that's sort of where I like differentiate myself from like my classmates. It's just, I could spend 20% effort and gain 80, but to get 100 or a 90. Like I just couldn't do that without significant effort. So I decided to put it into other things and,
Mhm.
really broaden my horizons, get a lot more experience that, my peers didn't necessarily have. And that's sort of what differentiated myself from, and it sort of set me up for this career really nicely. It was just that early mindset of, you know, being resourceful, picking up what you could, learning as much as you could. Um, so the academics important for sure, but not as important as I would have thought in high school.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of teachers like they tell you that, in your college apps, like it's not all about the grades. So it's really not. You have to be a well-rounded like student. But yeah, and I think that's a good transition to sort of the second section of the interview, which is more like questions specific to you. And the first one is, I think you sort of covered this earlier, but why did you choose to stop working in the lab and then move towards environment and sustainability for your master's degree?
Yeah. So I touched on this a little bit,
Mhm.
um, but there's also, I realized that like I finished up my degree in 2017 for my undergrad, and 2018 for my master's, and around then it was like I think climate change was sort of in the public mind, but it wasn't as much as it is now. But I sort of saw the signs like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a big thing in the future. I would like to, do at least something, do my part. And environmental sustainability was sort of like my way forward. My master's degree, I specifically chose a professional master's rather than not a thesis based master's because I think that it was useful for me at that point in my academic career to really see what was out there. My master's degree specifically, you didn't finish off with a thesis, you finished off with a consulting project. You did a lot of courses on a whole bunch of things rather than like really delving into like one thing like a thesis would. So at that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in environmental sustainability, but I wanted to do something. Um, and that's the main driver. It was just like climate change is a big issue. I'm not sure how I fit into it, but I'd like to at least prepare myself in as many ways as I could so that when I did graduate and I could, sort of mold myself into whatever opportunities came my way.
Oh yeah, that definitely is true. Like climate change, you just, everyone knows about it, and there's people that are like, okay, we need to try and do something, and there's people who are like, it's not in my future, so let's not worry about that. It's in like another someone else's future, like later generations. But I think it affects everyone, and like we do have to do our part, whatever little it may be. And yeah, so with that said, a lot of people think of policy analysis as like a government thing, like government and international relations, like that's what comes up. I that's like first in mind. So how would you say that's different because you work for Environment and Climate Change Canada?
So there are like for the most part there are many policy jobs out there, but
Mhm.
I think that at the federal level that's sort of where like you can do a lot of the I say fun stuff, not necessarily fun stuff, but you sort of work with everyone at the federal level, right? You work with provincial, territorial governments working on climate change. You work with municipalities working on climate change. You work with, indigenous organizations. You could consultations with industry. I think that it's my only experience it's my only like workplace working in policy analysis, but I think that it just gives you like a breadth of like of everything. You get to work with all the other players. You get to see what everyone else is doing. You get to, you could work bilaterally with other nations, with other organizations, NGOs. It's just, there's so many people that you get to work with, and there's so many things that you have to consider that it's really just like, you get a really good bird's eye view of what's going on, like federally, provincially, territory, all the way down to like the city level. So I think that, yeah, it's a big scope of work, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds really interesting, especially because it's more than just being like, oh, like a law or like, I don't know, just like straight up like pure government work. This is a little bit more and it lets you learn more and do more and even, have a greater impact in some way.
Yeah, and
And
it's very much like you have to like it's different from research because you sort of have to look at the trends of where things are going. Like I start off my day not by reading scientific papers, but by seeing what was, what was discussed at like parliamentary committees, like what sort of bills the government tabling, what are the renewal schedules looking like what was committed in the fall economic statement or the budget or the speaker from the throne, the mandate letters from the government, like what were the election promises, like where are the priorities of this government and where are things going to go. Because as a policy analyst pretty early on in my career, there are only so many levers that I can really pull to like affect change from my position, right? There's
Mhm.
so many things, only so many things that I can do to like, you know, influence the decision of like a 300,000 person strong like federal bureaucracy.
Mhm.
But if I can sort of read where the trends are, where things are going, like that's where I can affect change. So I think that it's challenging at times, and you do feel like sort of like nameless, but you do also have a role to play, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't, or they maybe they realize it, but they don't realize that they can actually do something from within government as well. So
No, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like, I know there's a lot of jobs that are like directly related, but then, if you're behind the scenes, you're still working together to do something, even if you don't realize it. So, and
yeah.
yeah, and I think this is our final question. So, I was reading your bio, and then you mentioned that your like part of your job includes delivering green funding programs. So, for those like who don't know, could you elaborate on what that exactly means?
Yeah, so right now my role is working on delivering the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which is like a $1.6 billion like commitment, um, basically to green the economy. It's to transition Canada to a low carbon economy. A good chunk of the money goes directly to provinces and territories to deliver their own smaller funding program. The thinking there was, the provinces and territories are each different. The way they generate their electricity is different. Their climate is different. What their needs are different. So it's better just to transfer it over to the provinces and territories, let them run their targets and run their programs. And then there's a bunch of smaller programs that go directly with organizations that basically provide grants to lower the carbon intensity of their operations. So it's work like that it's more program focused work. So it's delivering a program, making sure that it's run well, making sure that you're funding good businesses and good organizations that do good work, and doing so in a really fair and impartial way. So it's really satisfying work, because I think in my previous role I was working more on like strict policy development, strategic policy, and there's an insider saying when for people who work in strategic policy is that you're writing policy and like reading about the fun things that other people do, but you don't actually do any of it yourself. My current role is interacting with actual stakeholders, interacting with recipients, finding out what the cool work they do and what we can do to support it. So it's very much like I wrap up my day thinking, okay, cool. I helped someone out today, or like I'm like
Mhm.
working toward a bigger goal, and it's a really satisfying job. I really like it.
All right, yeah. And just like a little follow-up question. So I'm like from California and you're from Canada, but how do you say like your work would be different if it was like in another country or like maybe not even like North America?
It's tricky to say. Um, it's really hard to say how it would differ across countries, but ultimately, it's the bare bones of it is very similar. It's you get direction from your elected official to implement something, a plan to achieve a certain goal or do a certain thing, and your job is like a policy analyst working for a government, at least specifically in like Canada, which has like a nonpartisan public service. It doesn't matter which government we serve; we are implementing whatever policies or decisions that are made by the elected officials. For other governments, it could be a little bit more less, a little bit different, but at least that's what it is for Canada. So
All right,
so
yeah. I think that's really interesting and that sort of wraps up our interview. So thank you for coming today.
yeah, no problem.